Hello, Mark.
How are you, mate?
Very good, thank you.
Good. Are you well? Are your family well?
Yeah, as well as can be expected.
Yeah, are we all insane? I think I'm finding it hard to tell the difference nowadays, I have to say. But
Yeah,
yeah.
very. I think it's it's obviously it's a lot harder on some than others, even apart from your circumstances. I think some people's personalities are better suited to this than others, and I think I'm one of the lucky ones really because I'm mostly quite content to be a hermit.
Yeah, I suspected that might be the case. I mean, it's difficult living in central London because it's like, I'm one of those creatures that really survive, that really thrives on the energy of a city, and the energy of everything going on around me. I can't think of it personally. Can't think of anything worse than living in a quiet environment and just being on my own, in my own company all the time. Having said that, what's kept me sane is being in my studio all the time and getting out of the house. So, but those poor bastards that are just in the house all the time, I think, yeah, I mean, we'd eat each other. I would, anyway, because I'm quite greedy. Anyway, good. So thank you for doing this.
All right, welcome.
Really appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to it, actually, because I have to do a lot of research for these things, and you've done so much stuff. I've had to go on to Chic too. It's quite something, and I know you obviously you're a great educator and stuff. We talked about this before, and I do quite a lot of education as well, and I've been educated. I feel kind of unworthy of a lot of the stuff you've really, crikey, you've always been pushing forward, and that's something I really admire. But anyway, we're going to start with your early life, and do you want to tell me about how you grew up? You went around a lot of different places, didn't you, when you were young? Is that right?
Yeah. So my dad was an archaeologist, and he specialized in Greek pots, those sort of, 2 shades brown Greek pots. And so he traveled around the Mediterranean a fair amount and then came back and lectured in the UK. But I traveled around with him a fair amount and attended some rather dodgy sort of overseas boarding schools and things like that. But
right.
It's quite an interesting patchwork, to my childhood. And yeah, I mean, that my family were really not showbiz at all. They're all academics.
Right.
So, and my mum taught algebra and statistics, and I've got 5 brothers and sisters, most of whom are academic as well.
Crikey.
So it's kind of funny that I've ended up, being a university professor, because it's like I finally joined the family firm.
But the weird thing is, you were kind of parodying all that stuff in your peak to a certain extent. I felt anyway, and it was like, is he? I mean, because I didn't know it at the time. I was going, is he really as geeky as he's pretending to be, or is it some kind of construct? And obviously, to a certain extent, you really were that person. How did you view yourself at the time?
I mean, it's interesting. It's like, I suppose our generation, you always dreamed of going on top of the pops,
yeah.
Getting on Radio 1. And when my break came, I wore a sort of tailored suit and had my hair done and so on. And I watched it back with some friends and I thought, oh, I'm not actually going to be able to compete in the sort of Kajagoogoo stakes,
I don't agree with that, by the way.
Well, no. I meant in the days of, Simon Le Bon and Sting and Adam Ant and so on. I didn't feel it, that even if I was able to aspire to be a sort of pin-up, it wasn't going to happen, And it wasn't really me, And in fact, the people that I related to were the underdog boffins.
Right.
The brains of the outfit. That's that's who I related to. And
Can I just interrupt you there, because I think there's a dichotomy here between what you're saying and the fact that I would never, ever have dared being a solo artist at the start of my career. I just simply didn't have anything like the confidence enough to do that, even if I was a good enough keyboard player or whatever. I was in the sense that you were happy to be kind of, in one sense, behind the scenes and be the boffin, the power behind the throne. But you were the king, right? So you were actually the guy at the front, and you were excuse my language, but exposing yourself in a very real way, which completely goes against the grain of somebody who's, so it's like this really alluring kind of confidence mixed with a kind of slight awkwardness. I always found it really interesting.
But yeah, I mean, it's funny you would say that, and I mean, the first time I ever saw you on stage, at the Marquee with the Human League, you were a gang. You weren't a gang that I recognized. With your funny accents and lopsided hairdos and slide projections and stuff like that. It was a gang, and that's the thing about a band, is that you have strength in numbers. You have that cluster effect. So the personalities are they balance each other. And the responsibility, of being in the limelight is somewhat spread out that way as well.
Did you ever want to do that, though?
Well, I mean, I did it as a keyboard player, as a keyboard player behind other people. It's like, my first professional job was with Bruce Woolley in the Camera Club.
Right.
And there I was a conventional sideman. I was at the back of the stage with my keyboards, and I was starting to do the sort of synth boffin thing. But I bore none of the responsibility. I was not the one in the limelight. And because I'm a bit of a control freak, I didn't see myself as a front man, but I did see myself as being the one that made the decisions about the sounds and the songs and the set list and the visuals and the clothes and things like that. And so the fact that, DIY was just starting to become possible with the technologies that we had, that was the way I went. And I always felt, it's back to this underdog thing, it's like I always felt, well, if I tripped up, I've made a fool of myself. That was part of the mystique,
So you're Harold Lloyd, basically.
Harold Lloyd, that's exactly right. Harold Lloyd and Keaton and Chaplin and no coincidence that the early music videos, those days were like silent films with sort of 80s synth pop going on.
Yeah. But I still want to get back to this point that you could have easily gone, right, okay, I think I can front this, and I think I've got an artistic idea that I want to get across, and I know what you're one of those people a bit like me, just kind of can conceive of what it should sound like in your head, and you've got a reasonable idea of how to make it real onto tape or whatever. But even you could have been the leader of a group. You weren't. You were a solo artist. So I'm just curious. I just think it's really brave. I suppose the same thing with Howard Jones, wasn't it? And Nick Kershaw, and their names were the brand. So I understand it all. But I would never have dared to do that. Anyway, it's just me, probably. So anyway, so your dad was traveling around the world. You got a lot of influence from all your travel, presumably. It made you quite independent, presumably. What was your education like?
Well, I mean, my education was very good because it was mostly in private schools, and academically it was good. I'd say that in terms of real life, it was completely cloistered, really. I didn't go to the worst kind of boys' boarding schools, and with fags under the floorboards making toast. It wasn't all, and the cane and that. It wasn't like that. But
what school was? And they were a grammar school, isn't it?
Okay.
Horrible.
Well, grammar schools were probably worse, and I tended to go more progressive,
right,
private schools. But I by the time I was 14 or 15, I had a lot of guilt associated with that because because of the class system really in the UK, and because you felt cut off really from what was going on in the world. I mean, this is sort of mid-70s when, fairly precarious times in the UK with, union bashing and things like that. And I just, it felt too insular to me, really. I mean, I left school at 16 and got a job in a fruit and veg shop, and just sort of immersed myself in my hobby, really, which was music.
And what did your mum and dad think about that?
They were kind of chuffed, actually. I mean, I'm not sure if they thought I would keep it up, but, I had older siblings that had been successful following more in the footsteps, academically.
Yeah.
And so they would go out to dinner parties and they'd talk about what their kids were up to, and they'd finish up by saying, "I'm young Tom's a bit of a rock star,"
Young Tom, he's had it.
My mum used to, I don't know if you remember this, but the way they put the charts together back then was they took a sampling of various record shops. And it wasn't just W.H. Smith's and HMV, it would be little mum and pop, cottage industry shops as well. So in Cambridge, where my mum lived, there was a little tiny record shop. And whenever I had a record out, she would go in and buy like 30 copies of the single. Yeah. To the point where they'd have it ready for her. If I had a single out, she'd go in there and go, "Oh, Mrs. Robertson, got you an extra box here," if you like. So she would buy them thinking she could influence the charts, which was
there was all sorts of strange. That's kind of like the cottage industry, dodgy dealing. But I remember they used to give away loads of stuff, didn't they, to small record stores especially. So that they deliberately pushed it very hard. I suppose it's like big supermarkets now. So, another thing, I was just looking at a bunch of videos. I saw a very funny video. These videos where they have people watching your video first time. There's a great one. This black girl, and she's like going, "Yeah, that's different. Yeah, oh yeah, oh." She blinded with science, and she was going, "Yeah, it's kind of freaky, but it's funky, And I thought, this is so cool, So your relationship to technology, found sound, you use quite a lot of that on quite a lot of your records. But also, in your heart of hearts, you love funk, don't you? And you've got a kind of soulful heart, which is, in theory, a kind of contradiction with the kind of technological thing. We always got criticised for that. Not criticised. We always got people want you to fall into a certain category, and they go, "Right, can't you be more like Kraftwerk?" I said, "Well, I actually grew up with soul music. I grew up with funk. That's what I used to dance to when I was growing up." So how did all that become a major influence on and a continuing influence throughout your career on your work?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you that people like to pigeonhole you, and I think in the UK, there's not very much indigenous music in the UK. Most of it, we went out and sort of colonized the world and brought stuff back, whether it was Kraftwerk or whether it was, reggae or African music or Chicago club music. We sort of brought it back and put a spin on it and resold it to the world, And I think there was a tendency among the sort of intelligentsia in the UK, both music fans and, critics of the sort of NME variety, to want to imbue our national treasures with a certain sort of indigenous authenticity that I'm not sure was really there, but they would like to believe that, if you're Morrissey and you grew up in the projects of Manchester, that would give you a certain authenticity that is sort of what you came from. I mean, the fact is that Britain, by the time we were teenagers, was already a real hodgepodge. I mean, nobody would accuse UB40 of faking the reggae thing, because that's what was all around them culturally when they were growing up, and that's the music that they make. And it's not appropriation; it's just a reflection of what you grew up with.
Absolutely, and also bands like UB40 and the Specials were genuine genuinely multicultural. I mean, the clubs they went to, they weren't black, white, or anything. They were hybrid. Ostensibly more black, perhaps, but the bands were fully multicultural. And actually, the desire of a lot of kind of second, third generation immigrants, or second generation immigrants whose parents may have come in on the Windrush generation, wanted to integrate. They were very proud of their parents' music and the music they were brought up on. But I found it fascinating, all that stuff, when I was growing up. I don't know if you ever went to where did you grow up in England?
Oxford, outside Oxford.
Right.
Well, London initially, and then outside Oxford.
Right. Probably not so many blues clubs there then. There might have been. I don't know, actually. There are some poor areas of no, perhaps not. But in Sheffield, anyway, where I used to live, I lived cheek by jowl with one of the biggest West Indian communities, and they used to have blues clubs, which were essentially giant sound systems in two terraced houses knocked together. And at the weekends, they'd have deep reggae dub, and the entry fee was you'd pay a fiver to get in, and they gave you a joint, and that was it. And you just sat there, listened to music. You were probably only like a couple of white people in there, and the rest were black. And that was a massive education for me. I felt very honoured, actually, that I was like, I was only about 16 at the time. Anyway, so moving on. So you worked with Beatnik, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Well, by the end of the 80s, I was living in Los Angeles. Never really intended to, but I went there for a year to try it out. And during that time, I met Kathleen and got married and stayed. But by the end of the 80s, I was very disenchanted with the music business. And
why? Hold on, sorry. Why were you disenchanted? I know we're going a bit out of sequence here, but I quite like doing that.
Yeah, it's okay. I was disenchanted with the music business by the end of the 80s because it had really become an industry, in my opinion, that lost any of its sort of naive charm. Yeah. Conversely, when I first got involved with record company people and publishers and stuff, in the late 70s, early 80s, they were mostly music fans.
Yes.
That were out every night at clubs, and they couldn't really believe their luck having a day job, which would pull down a salary, and yet they could sit around and admire music and bands and discover bands and so on. So what I'm talking about. There was a certain innocence to it then. And, by the end of the 80s, it had got very big and corporate, the music industry. And artistically, the ideas were a little bit thin on the ground. And what they chose to do was basically sort of resell people their music collections on CD.
Yeah.
That was basically the business model.
Yeah.
And that, from quarter to quarter, they had revenues to hit and so on. And I found it very distasteful. But I also, I think I'd had some commercial success, and I'd also done what I consider to be some of my best stuff that didn't have commercial success and didn't really attract a lot of attention. And it was clear to me that to the industry, to the corporations, this was a pointless waste. It's like, if you've got a winning formula, you've sold some records, made us some money, why wouldn't you want to chop them out? Waste them. Let's just chop them out and have a series of cookie cutter hits.
Exactly.
We've worked so hard to break you through the glass ceiling. Now you've made it. Why wouldn't you just refine that formula and sell tens of millions of records? That was kind of the thing. And if the fact that I wanted to experiment and try different things, and it was all a bit tiresome. Basically, it's like a self-indulgent artist that wants to, expand. and so I just felt dissatisfied with it basically, and there were other horizons.
Yeah. I came to that kind of realization quite a lot later, because I was doing all right with production. I'm just happy with having a job, and still selling records and stuff. And it took me until the end of the 90s, really, when I decided to completely turn my back on music production, pop music production for a while, and start the whole illustrious thing that I did with immersive soundscaping. I did an interview with Jerry Casale from Devo a couple of days ago, and he's been a friend of mine since the mid-80s. We had the same management company, and but he's always had this kind of, he's like the king of embittered, he's got that thing going on. Even from back in the 80s, I looked at some old videos of his, and he was saying the same stuff then. He's a real iconoclastic kind of character. But I'm with you on the late 80s thing. It was like the marketing departments had taken over the major record companies fundamentally. I've got a great story actually about Green, Gartside, and he had a great relationship with Warner's, his record label, and they indulged him. I mean, they used to let him take 3, 4 years, 5 years to make an album. Jeff Travis, I think, and anyway, they got a bit bored with it, and one day they called him into the office and said, and this is Green told me this story, called him into the office and said, it wasn't Jeff Travis, it was another executive, and he said, all right, we've done some market research here, and we know we can have a massive record with your next record. So here's what you need to do. You need to do 3 up-tempo songs. You can have it with a little bit of reggae tinge if you want. You can have 3 mid-tempo songs, but the majority of your audience, and we've done focus groups, love your slower songs like Oh Patty and stuff. And so we want you to do 4 of those. And he walked out. There's the meeting. He said, if this is what it's come to, I'm not going to make another record for you, ever. Mm-hmm. And so that I think is a kind of typical example of where the business was going at that point. You ended up with A&R executives who had I'm not going to name the names, but there was, I am going to name names, fuck it. Rob Dickens, right? Famous A&R guy. At one point in the 80s, late 80s, decided he wanted to have his own Pro Tools rig in his office. And for people who don't know, that's like a top of the range kind of, you don't need one. If you're just listening to records, deciding what to put out, so that he could put it into the Pro Tools rig and fuck around with it, the master. And 90% of the time, apparently, he used to just speed it up and went, now that's a hit, right? Good story, isn't it? Anyway, moving on. So I just want to go back to, obviously, you had some massive hits. we were lucky enough to perform with you. She Blinded Me with Science, and we had a great laugh doing that. My personal favourite is Wind Power. I thought that was really futuristic sounding, and it was hard to pin down. That's what I really liked about it. It was less directly going for the kind of pop jugular. It was more, I just felt you pushed it into a much more experimental territory, and I really, really liked that. What was your opinion about Wind Power compared to the other big hits you had?
It was actually driven by the bass riff, basically. It's like I got this box, and it was an early PPG, the size of a refrigerator, and it was called a 340 380 wave computer, and it had a screen and had little micro cassettes that you used to load up.
Yeah, I remember.
And it was actually the first wavetable synthesizer. And so the way it works is you set up these waves, a bit like a Joy Division T-shirt, with the mountain waves on the front, and it would scan through these and play them. And if you wrote really wonky ones, it would every time you played a note, it would actually have a rhythm to it. So I set this thing up and I played a note and went but every time you held down a note, right?
Yeah.
And I started playing with that, as you do when you have something rhythmic, you start sort of grooving with it. And I came up with this sort of glitter beat type bass riff.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that's where it started from, basically. And then, I was this was actually long before offshore wind farms and things. But I mean, there'd been a few examples of people who had set up wind generators. Even going back to the 30s and 40s. And there was the guy at the time in the Hebrides that was off the grid. I thought, this is amazing. He had a stream that he dammed and he had a windmill and he didn't draw any electricity. And I thought this guy was fantastic. And, so I found the idea of wind power very evocative and windmills. And I tried to make a sound with one of my other synths of like blades whirring around.
Yeah.
And this is before samplers were around, but there was a box which you probably remember, which is an AMS digital delay that sat in a box, sat in a rack, and it had a keypad on it, and you could pitch shift, but you could save memories of pitch shift. So I took a bit of my voice, just going and I pitch shifted it up like a fifth, and I saved a bit of that, and I had 8 memories on different buttons, and I could actually play this little keypad, this part going, which is what we came to associate with sample. It's the first thing you do with a sampler, right? Exactly. But this is a couple of years before that. And so, I basically constructed this backing track using all of these sort of ideas. And then for the drums on it, you remember Simmons drums, of course, which people are starting to get, and they had those hexagonal, pads of kits, all that sort of thing. I didn't play drums, but I had a portable Simmons box, which is a briefcase, like a flight case with 7 small hexagonal pads in it. Yeah. And you could actually play them with your fingernails. So I had that hooked up to my Simmons drums, and I was playing with my fingernails, which basically meant that every beat had probably 4 individual hits to it. So sort of like overdubbed Simmons, So it sounded a bit different from the typical, Simmons sound when people are sort of playing with sticks. And so the drum track on that is just me going, with these Simmons pads. So that was the way it came together. And yeah, I mean, it was futuristic because it didn't, that song didn't belong to any genre really. It wasn't electronic sounding, in terms of, that sounds like a genre of electronic music that we're familiar with and so on. It was really outside of all of those things. Also, it wasn't a relationship song, I love you, baby, why don't you call me so, it was something about the planet, geography, energy. It was just quite other, as far as pop music.
I really liked it. It stuck with me for a long time. Well, it still does. And the other thing I wrote down when I was doing research is like a lot of what you do is about weaving kind of knowledge and science with art. So it's that kind of Renaissance man thing. Is that how you feel about yourself? I mean, do you feel you're a Renaissance man? I mean, how do you view the relationship between science and art? Spoiler alert, I think that the two, for me, are almost indistinguishable in how I approach things. I'm not I don't tend to separate the two in my mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm with you there. I think that there's a handshake between art and science. Science on a certain level is taken more seriously because it's about medicine and energy and exploration and things that we think are absolutely crucial. But I mean, art, music are crucial as well. It's like they're not viewed often as like part of our staple. But I've really felt in the last year, you know, with the pandemic and stuff, that people need it so much. You know, they need it like they need food. They need it like they need to breathe. And it is a crucial part of our existence, really. But this handshake comes down to the fact that artists need tools. You know, we need a palette from which to draw. And we're inspired both by the natural world, you know, taking a walk through the woods in the autumn, or you know, on the beach or whatever, or watching you know, animals and birds. But we're also inspired by what the scientists do. You know, the scientists come up with these things based on the numbers, based on the engineering feasibility of something. Yeah. And artists see that, and we go, yes, but what if? You know, they evoke something different. These inventions, you know, progress is inspiring to us, and we translate that into music and words and pictures and so on. And it's a give and take. You know, it's like, because that in turn inspires the scientists, because we open up new possibilities to them.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, just going back to gear for a minute. You know, we took a minute ago about samplers. The Australian geezers that invented the Fairlight were engineers. They weren't musicians at all. They knew nothing about music. They just figured out on paper that it would be feasible to take a sample of a waveform and play it back at different frequencies. And so they did it and built a machine. No idea what it was for. Stevie Wonder was on tour in Australia, and he asked to see a Fairlight and whether they could bring it up to his hotel suite so he could have a play with it. And Fairlight said, "Who's Stevie Wonder?"
No.
Seriously.
Oh, shit. We bought, I mean, did you buy one of the early Fairlights?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so did we. And we had problems, I have to say, because, you know, obviously coming from the world of analog synths, like you do as well, we were so excited, and it looked so cool, didn't it, with the display and the waveforms and the and so we decided we would stop songwriting for 3 weeks and just do a session of multiple sessions of 15 solid days of sampling. So we did this, and we kept checking it back, and it was all right. Everything's good. We got to the end of it, and we hired in loads of percussion and all this stuff so that we could have a big, you know, create our own sound world. And then we came to it, and we started assembling it all, and played back the like these crash cymbals, and played it back, and it went. And I'm going, oh, there must be something, you know, maybe we just overloaded the channel. So we tried again, and so we turned it down, reduce the headroom, and this time it went. I went, oh, so we just paid whatever it is, £30,000 for this machine, and we were going, it can't be right, you know. We didn't really understand what 8-bit, 16-bit, all that stuff. So we rang up Australia. The people who actually designed it, they said, "Yeah, mate, it's a little bit, it's quantizing noise. We can't get rid of it. It happens when you're recording highly dynamic content at the top end." And I'm going, but he's not doing what you told us it could do. And of course, it was great for anything that was just kind of mid-range, and like, you know, the strings and were lovely and unique sounding, and there was a warmth to it as the bottom end, but anything at the top end was just not usable for us anyway. How did you feel about it when you?
Well, I mean, it was really exciting. I got, I don't know, number 6 or number 7 in the country, and I just got my first record advance. I can't remember what the numbers were, but I mean, it was something along the lines of 30 grand I spent on the Fairlight, and 25 grand bought me a flat in central London. I had like 5k left over to live on or something like that. And I mean, so I actually would have been much better off buying a couple more flats in central London and then just not work in the rest of my life. But no, I mean, it was really, I mean, it had 8 voices, right? A little bit under a second each. And it had that lovely page eye, where you had a total of 8 things. So it forced you to be very economical and thoughtful about what you did. Because if you wanted to have a kick drum and snare and a hi-hat, that's 3 gone right there. Yeah. So it doesn't leave a whole lot for a string chord or something like that. So, I sort of forced you to be very economical. Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed it. I went on tour with it, and actually the very worst gig that I ever had was at Sheffield. You would know the venue. And the gig never happened. I think it's probably the only gig where the show must go on, but it didn't. There was no gig that night, and I still every now and then I get a note from some mega fan who goes, "I was at the Sheffield that right,
the City Hall." Night. And why did you cancel it?
Well, the Fairlight never booted up.
Oh, well, that's so you didn't have a backup, obviously, at that price. But I to be honest, as soon as I bought an emulator 2, it just turned into a doorstop for us. Mm-hmm. And eventually, Ian actually bought it. He I think he sold it to a Hong Kong technology museum, and I think it's in there now. I think I sold my Laserdisc player to the same museum. Those are the days. Okay, so do you know? I love. I didn't realize that you had co-written and produced Magic's Wand by Houdini. Huh. I loved that 12-inch. I just absolutely loved it. I just didn't realize, and until I did some research, and I'm going, that's one of my favorite ever dance records. Like it, so well done for that. Going back to the kind of future-facingness that you obviously is a major part of your thing. I suppose it is to a certain extent with us, but not in such an obvious way. The way that you relate to technology has obviously led you to quite a lot of success with kind of video games and AR, VR, XR, and all that stuff. Tell us a little bit about your adventures in that world.
Well, I mean, I'm always drawn to stuff that is a bit unexplored.
Me too. Yeah.
And I think going back to the beginning, it's like that those early days of DIY synth pop were very exciting because nobody knew what the rules were yet, and anything you did, you could almost guarantee it would be unique in the world because there was only a handful of us doing it, right?
Yeah.
Conversely, today, you can buy a laptop with every analog synth in it ever made. But the problem is there's 10,000 other guys on your block that have got the same setup. Yeah. And they all flip through the presets and then they stop at number 17, which sounds really cool. And they make a track out of it and put it up on SoundCloud. So by the same token, you can almost guarantee that anything you do today is going to be totally non-unique. It's going to be, ubiquitous the moment it's out there. So that was a very exciting time to be doing that. And I don't think it is now. Conversely, if you're doing stuff in a field like artificial intelligence or virtual reality today, it's going to be fresh again. It may be crap, right? But it's going to be fresh, and it's going to take visionary people to show the world what it's capable of, right? And that's where I want to be. That's my place in the world, is to be somebody that goes, hang on a minute, before you give up on this, let me just have a fiddle around with it and see if I can do something cool. So that's what I've always done. So, that's why I went from doing the synth pop stuff into, I suppose next really would be music videos, in the early days of MTV, sort of, writing and directing my own. And then at the end of the 80s, I'd been more, I'd consulted with some of the tech companies that I worked with, like Opcode and DigiDesign and Fairlight and PPG and people like that. And I loved the idea that if I made a suggestion to them, if I had an idea of something they could do with a future, rev, I would make the suggestion, and 6 months later, I'd get a rev, and I go, wow, they actually listened to me, and now I can play with this thing. I got hooked on that. And I loved the idea of actually being one of the authors, one of the creators of these tools. And so I was living in LA at the time, and just up the road was Silicon Valley. Yeah. And I used to go up there all the time and take meetings and do concerts. I was paid as a consultant for some of these tech companies. And there was one research company in particular called Interval, and they said, well, we think you've got some really good ideas. We'd actually like to get you on the payroll to just sit here and think stuff up.
Yes, please. Can I have one of those jobs?
Twist my arm, So, I did that for a while, and then I thought, okay, but I need some independence. Yeah. And this was probably sort of 92, 93. I've been involved in software, been involved in video games and things like that. And money was starting to pour into Silicon Valley, speculative money, because it was the beginning of the web, basically. And that got all of the angel investors and VCs and like Texas meatpacking tycoons, eager to write you out a check for any half-baked idea, that you could put on the back of an envelope. They were falling over themselves to invest in something. Wow. So they knew about me, and they they'd sort of, they halfway through the meeting, they go, by the way, the Stones are coming through next month. Could you get me a backstage?
Oh, that all counts, didn't it? Yeah.
I was there linked to the world of rock and roll, but then I sort of go, yeah, but would you mind funding my company for a few $100,000? And it's like, sure. They pull out their checkbooks, and it's like, okay, this is good. I thought, I never actually need to make any real money or any profit. I could just have these guys fund my research. That was the feeling at the beginning.
And did it work out that way?
Well, it was fun for a while. It went on far too long. It got far too serious. We had 120 people in the company at one point. This is Beatnik, by the way.
Oh my God.
And we got, every month there'd be a stack of press. I was doing interviews left, right, and center with business and technology magazines. We had tens of millions of people, register and download free stuff from our site and so on. And the investors started talking about IPOs and so on. And I just got sucked into all of it, really. And it was, my wife and I had our Caribbean island picked out, and we had a date to go public and all the rest of it. And it all blew up. As inevitably, the whole tech bubble burst, at the end of the millennium. And
but it actually would have been. Sorry, did you lose money out of that though? Or were you at the top of the tree making the money, but unfortunately it never went any further, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was making a decent salary. Whether it would have been less or more than I would have made if I carried on in the music business, I don't know. I was respectably paid, but plus we had a family with, a mortgage and 3 small kids, and so I was a well-paid executive for a few years. And on paper, I was worth billions if it ever turned into anything. But it really didn't. Now, the healthiest thing for me actually would have been if, when the bubble burst at the end of the century, I just had no choice but to give up and go back to my first love, of music.
Right.
But actually, we had a second chance, which was that among all of the stupid deals that we did and all of the press releases we put out, one of them happened to be with the world's largest mobile phone company, Nokia, who had licensed our technology to do polyphonic ringtones in their phones. And that was just one of a heap of contracts and deals that we signed. Wow. The only one that had any teeth at all. But unfortunately, it meant that I still had skin in the game. And so I wasted another, 8-9 years messing around with that stuff.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that's quite something, isn't it? Because that's a lot of time, creative energy. I suppose you could think stuff that you could have been. I don't know. Sometimes I think that the stuff. I don't get enough commercial stuff, not like you, but I'd like to. But I get some, and I often regard that as the kind of that's the bread and butter, and then you can do the real exciting creative stuff, which doesn't cost you money to do, but you don't earn any money out of it either. And so what I'm getting at is we have a lot of similarities, I think, in as much as we want to keep pushing the boundaries of art and music if we can. But we always have to earn a living. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. People think because you've been on Top of the Pops, or you've been in the business for 40 years that you basically you do have your own Caribbean island, and you do, you're Jeff Bezos. Well, it's not the case, I'm afraid. Everybody's got responsibilities, and but yeah, obviously not moaning about being poor or anything. But it's just interesting how that balance emerges. And I just want to go back to the virtual reality thing. I have to be brutally honest. I've been involved in a few projects with virtual reality, and I was always really optimistic and keen on the idea of it. And then I had a couple of unfortunate experiences with companies that that had creative heads that were interested in they were more interested in commandeering your reality, and in a kind of semi-fascistic way, as I viewed it, than they were in creating something that was, shall we say, more humanitarian and more positive. It really, I was on the judging panel of BAFTA Interactive for a few years, and I met some people I really disliked who were at the top of the executive tree of big companies in that field. Now we're in a situation today where they make more money than the music industry, right, and the film industry, games in particular, and I suppose, games. There are people who make more money out of professionally playing computer games, and they make more money out of people watching them play esports than even people who make the games. I just think, what a strange world. Well, what's your view on all that stuff?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the public spend a lot of time listening to music, and the public spend a lot of time playing video games. And in this era, they are paying for their video games, but they're not paying for their music. The era of paying for music is behind us. Music is now, if not free, it's as free as the water in the tap. It's like every time you turn on the tap, you don't stop and think about what you're paying for it. It's just there.
Yeah.
And music, basically all the music in the world is there as well. And that's sort of where it's got to. Video games are still at a point where there is a value associated with getting the newest, latest game, or subscribing, on Steam or whatever. So I think that's sort of an era we're in. I don't think as professionals we can bemoan that, because, any more than if you're in the steel industry, you're sad there's no more steel industry or coal or shipbuilding, whatever it may be. It's like these things have their halcyon days, they have their golden eras, and the value associated with that industry wanes over time. And I think that's the case with music. Now, the really sad thing is that the value of music, the economic value of music, had shifted from selling records over to live performance, which is, was okay by most people. A lot of musicians, that's what they do, and then that was absolutely fine. But now with this darn plague going on, that's just gone up in smoke, and that's really a miserable state of affairs. I don't know how we recover from that.
I don't know. I'm involved with the Ivers Academy, and we over the last few years we've kind of transformed into under not just my guidance but several other people. We've transformed it to more of a lobbying and campaigning organization than just old white guys having a nice time at parties. And it's really tricky. It's really immensely tricky. We're fighting the good fight, but it's he feels a bit like King Canute at the moment, you know. Anyway, but we're down to the fun part now. As we approach the last 10 minutes. So, you're a professor now, is that right?
I am.
Are you? I'm jealous. I'm an honorary professor, so that's all right.
Oh, an honorary professor.
Yeah. No, that's I didn't even finish my A levels. Anyway, so I do a kind of smash itsy type thing at the end, just to kind of. I'm going to compile all these answers at some point because I think it's quite interesting seeing people's contrasts. So, what's your favourite book?
Oh, wow, good question.
I mean, it doesn't have to be your all-time favourite. I mean, one of your favourite.
I'm trying to think what I was just reading City of Thieves, which is actually written by one of the game runners from Game of Thrones.
Right.
Showrunners from Game of Thrones. Let me see, what favourite books? Really hard, actually. I mean, I liked Great Expectations. I've gone back to a few times. But modern stuff, you put me on the spot there. Really hard to pick out a single one.
It can be anything. It can be old, new. I mean, you've already answered the question, so I'll let you off that one. Okay. Now, what's your favourite artist? What's your favourite? Hey, not musical artist. Who's your favourite visual artist, or installation artist, or
contemporary?
Could be anything.
Klimt.
Good answer. Yeah, it covers a lot of bases, I think, for me. Favourite film? Just one you're inordinately fond of.
Eraserhead.
Yeah, come on. Great. Absolutely otherworldly, right? All right, here's a good one. Favourite song of yours?
Screen Kiss.
Oh, interesting. I don't know that one. I'll have to go back and listen to that. And what's your favourite synth? I know it's horses for courses, but there must be one that you've got a particular kind of soft spot for.
PPG Wave.
Yeah, I thought you might say that. I once hired one of those. I could make head and tail of it. I remember.
That's actually what I liked about it, Martin, was that you never, and the manual didn't help you very much, and you twiddle the knob and suddenly you're in a different universe. Whereas a Moog or a Roland or something, you sort of you learn it to the point where it becomes predictable. I like that the PPG was unpredictable.
That's interesting, isn't it, about the direction of travel of. Yeah, you're right. Some synths are like there's like a there's like a vanishing point of you get to know it so well, and it's like you can do little tweaks, but then there are things that are kind of really more like the metaphor would be open world architecture of games, which just seem. I tell you what's like that. It's the Teenage Engineering OP1 for me. It's like every time I switch that fucking thing on, I've got no idea what's going on, and I love it. And it's just, I find new things out every day about it. What about your favourite musical artist? And it doesn't have to be a band or pop music or rock. It can be anything.
Favourite musical artist?
Or one that's had a big influence on you.
Joni Mitchell.
I love Joni Mitchell. Do you know who else is a massive Joni Mitchell fan? Vince Clarke.
Really? That's interesting. I wouldn't have known that from listening to Vince's music.
No. Also, but his all-time favourite is Paul Simon. You can kind of hear it somehow. It's quite good. So you're also music director for the Tech Conference. Are you still doing that?
No, I'm not doing that anymore. I did it for 12 years. Got too big for my taste, really, but it was fun for a while.
Really? And what's coming up next?
So, I mean, actually, I teach a course at Johns Hopkins University. Johns Hopkins University, which is sort of best known for medicine and research and things like that, has a conservatory called Peabody, which is the oldest in the USA, about 170 years old. And they, will teach you to play violin or oboe or whatever to the highest possible level, but they wanted to modernize their curriculum and offer new career paths. So they have a very good composition department, and they said, would I come and teach composition for media?
Wow.
And so I designed that course a few years ago, and we're currently in the third cohort of students. Actually, this week I'm auditioning the fourth. It's a 4-year undergraduate course. It's actually the only sort of film and game composition undergraduate course in North America. Usually you do that as a master's. You do a music degree first, you do it as a master's. But you can, at undergraduate level, you can do a 4-year undergraduate course in film and game music composition under me and my department. So I've got a little new media lab there at Johns Hopkins, and we do stuff with VR and AI and stuff like that. But primarily, it's how to write for picture. Whether it is some sort of recursive stuff in games, looping and layering and stuff, or whether it's more conventional sort of Hans Zimmer type, composition.
Fantastic. I love that. Well, if you ever need a master class, I'm more than happy to help out, and let me know. It's been an absolute pleasure, and sorry for getting you up so early in the morning. Are you in?
Oh no,
you're in the US at the moment, right?
Yeah, but I'm in Baltimore, which is only 5 years out from you, so it's lunchtime.
Like that. Yeah. Fantastic. All right, man. Well, look, I hope that we're all going to get to perform live again soon. And when we do the next BS things, God, we all need to have some fun, don't we? And some community.
Absolutely. Let's have some steam. Yeah.
Have some steam. And have a, lovely year. I hope your course goes well. Is that all online now, I presume?
Yeah.
Yeah, same with us. It's real bore. All right, man. I will see you very soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Say hi to all our friends in common, and good luck with the podcast.
Oh, thanks, man. Thank you. Bye-bye.